Thank you. Welcome to AWS reInvent in Las Vegas. So we're here today, this morning, to talk about how to optimize the movement of data across what is becoming a very, very complex ecosystem that we all operate in. Just first of all, introductions. I'm Neil Templeton. I'm the SVP of Marketing at a company called Console Connect. And on my left, Paul Gamp, who's the CTO of Console Connect. And on the right is Riggs Goodman III, who's the Principal Partner Solutions Architect at AWS. So without further ado, we're going to get into the session. We've got probably about 40 minutes or so of presentation, and we're hoping to have a little bit of time at the end for questions, so we'll open it for questions at the end. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. So the first part that I'm going to actually walk through is giving an overview of where data and where the network comes into play. Okay, clicker is working now. For many customers or most enterprises, data is the key to a lot of the value that you bring to your customers. And whether you're talking about just a regular workload with the data that you use, or this fancy thing that people might not have heard of generative AI, that little thing that we talk about a little bit now. Data is the thing that actually brings customers to you from an enterprise perspective. But when you're talking about data and where it lives, you need to think about, how do I make sure I have the right network connectivity? How do I make sure that I secure that network connectivity properly? So whether that data exists in a colo, on-premise locations, or in AWS, you're building your network properly in order to get that data and that communication in between where your data lives and where your application lives. So as an example, because it is 2024 and my clicker is no longer working, okay, I might have to stand up here right now. Let's talk about a generative AI application. How many people here use generative AI like this? You have a front-end web application and you have an LLM behind it. Is that how everybody uses it? What sits behind a lot of the generative AI applications? You have LLMs and you have other data that is inclusive of enterprise data, customer data, other things that you need to take into account in order to make sure that you're providing that value to customers. And so what you see is a lot of implementations of generative AI workloads where it's using things like RAG. It's using things where additional data outside just the training data that exists within the LLM is used in order to provide enterprises the value that they want to bring to your customer. This looks simple, right? There's this nice thing that sits behind it called data governance. And all that data, whether it exists in an on-premise location, co-location, or inside AWS, in order to use that data with your application, whether it's a regular workload, whether it's with a generative AI application, you need to make sure you have the data governance, make sure you have the connectivity in order to use that with your application. And this is where, especially with generative AI applications, where a lot of the unstructured or structured data exists in an on-premise location or a co-location, you need to make sure that you have the network in order to provide that connectivity to that data or to move the data. Because depending on what industry you're in, whether you're in FSI or some government agency or other things, you might have different residency requirements. You might have different operator access or resiliency requirements of what you need in order to provide access to that data. At AWS, we have over 30 regions inside AWS, all across the world. Many of these locations meet those requirements of where you want your data to sit. And whether it's in the US, South America, Europe, Australia, there's a lot of different locations where your data can sit. In certain situations, you can connect to this data over the internet. You can connect to this data over VPN, depending on what your requirements are. For internet, you can do things like TLS. You can do data transfers over the internet, but then you have to think about latency and exactly how many hops it's going through in order to get to AWS, or with the residency requirements, where it's actually passing through. With site-to-site VPN, you can encrypt the entire packet, and it gives you that capabilities that instead of just encrypting the payload, you can encrypt the entire packet to get it to AWS. But what many customers are looking for, they're looking for that private connectivity because their data might exist in a colo, might exist in an on-prem location, and this is where Direct Connect comes into play, and partners like Console Connect provide that connectivity for that private connectivity in order to get data to AWS. For Direct Connect, we have over 130 different Direct Connect locations, and this continuously grows. I think in 2023, we added about 20 or 30 different new locations. 2024, we've added a handful of locations, and it all comes back to the requirements that customers have of where they're looking to connect into AWS. And using Direct Connect partners like Console Connect, we allow you to have that private connectivity from 50 meg all the way up to 400 gig, so you can do that data movement. You can actually connect to the data in a private way, so you can get that data for your workload, whether it's generative AI, whether it's some other analytics or ML type workload that you can use to provide that value to your customers. So with that, let me turn it over to Neil, and he can talk a little bit more about what Console Connect does.
Before we get into that, though, I just wanted to say what a crazy place Vegas is. It's the first time, my first time at AWS in Vegas, and I arrived yesterday from London, and my wife is actually, she's working in Paris this week. She's over in Paris, and we're having a bit of a FaceTime catching up. She's sitting in a cafe underneath the Eiffel Tower in the background, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sitting in fake Paris in Vegas, underneath the Eiffel Tower, sipping a cafe. It's surreal, crazy place. But anyways, it's good to be here, really good to be here. So Console Connect, what's Console Connect all about? Well, our mission is to make it as easy as possible for you to access data and to move data in a very safe, efficient way around this complex ecosystem that we're all part of. You know, as Riggs was saying, data really has emerged as really the linchpin that drives business value. It really helps businesses innovate, and it really is the driver of economic growth in the sector that we're in particular. In China, back in 2020, they declared data as the 5th pillar of production after land, labor, capital, and technology. And in this modern business landscape, it's essential that organizations become data-driven. For those that are data-driven, they are competitive, not only more competitive than others, but actually data is a competitive weapon. It helps people really understand the climate and the landscape in which they operate. It helps them understand customers, customer value. It helps them really understand the business model and make decisions quickly. So data really is a competitive weapon and becoming more and more so. What I want to do in the next few slides is to just really focus on that whole backdrop to how we move data around this ecosystem, what's changing and what's the impacts, particularly on how that data moves and the underlying network that sits beneath all of this. See if I can get the clicker to work. So we're seeing exponential data growth, massive growth. You can see there 19-20% a year compound annual growth rate from whichever analytics firm you look at, Forrester, Gartner, whoever. And that's been driven mainly in the business world by digital business transformation, Internet of Things, cloud-based workloads, applications and services sitting in the cloud in this ecosystem. And as Riggs alluded to now, it's all being turbocharged by this tsunami of data that's about to hit us for AI and Gen AI applications. And we see companies that collect and analyze these large volumes of data, as I said, have real competitive advantage. But the landscape is actually changing. With large volumes of data means the requirements for moving that data means that the network that underpins it needs to be able to operate at scale, and it needs to be flexible. It needs to be able to cope with that fluctuating nature of demand and be able to scale accordingly. We're seeing increasingly the need for real-time data processing, so particularly for syncing of a lot of these systems, for inferencing in AI, et cetera. What does that mean? Well, it means the network that underpins it needs to be very, very high performance, very low latency. We're seeing also the acceleration in modernization and move to cloud. We all operate in this multi-cloud, hybrid cloud world. And it's really important that businesses can synchronize that data between those different environments in an optimum way. And we've seen the whole area around compliance and security becoming hugely important. I'll talk about that in a minute. But data repatriation, holding data, moving data back into on-prem data center environments, sensitive data, really trying to control the way that data moves. Some key external factors here that are influencing the whole landscape as well. So the whole area of cyber risk, there's some examples there of key breaches that have happened. We're all familiar with these, all often too familiar, particularly over the last year or two. We've had some big ones there. Ticketmaster, Live Nation organization, hackers stole 500 million customers' data and demanded $500,000 ransom. Huge. We've seen big breaches at Dell, at AT&T, at Snowflake over the last 12, 18 months or so. So cyber risk is top of everybody's mind, and has a huge impact on how you should move data and how you should control the movement of that data. Data regulation. I live in London. In Europe, we have this thing called GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, which has a real impact on the movement of data and people's ability to control that data, to keep data within specific jurisdictions, particularly sensitive data. We've seen fines over the last year of, I think it was like 2.3 billion euros in total for GDPR breach. And I think half of that actually was from Meta. They had about 1.2 billion. So huge fines being imposed. We're also starting to see regulation emerge around AI and what's happening with AI. The European Artificial Intelligence Act came into force in 2024. Again, lots of controls on how you move that data, store that data, protect that data. And then, of course, the backdrop of geopolitical security. National and regional approaches are very, very different to how data should be governed, and that results in issues around data flows between different jurisdictions around the world. So these components of data movement are having a huge impact on the underlying network in which we operate, and that's something that at Console Connect is really at the heart of what we do. You can see there some of the components of value around data movement of this data ecosystem: storage, process, optimize, analyze, observe, and look at the massive numbers that are associated with that market. So growth in these requirements for the whole data ecosystem is having a real impact on the infrastructure models, which we're going to take a look at in a minute. And Paul's going to take you through some very interesting case studies, which really illustrate some of the things that we see from our customers, and we're helping them to solve. So businesses are swimming in data, and their survival or their ability to thrive really hinges on the ability for them to integrate that data, analyze that data, extract value from that data to drive business decisions. And increasingly, this is in real time. Earlier this year at Console Connect, we went out to our customers and to a lot of our prospects and surveyed them on this whole area of data movement and what was top of mind for them. What were some of the roadblocks to them extracting value from data? We talked to CTOs, CIOs, chief data officers, DevOps, FinOps, anybody that really has a real interest in data movement, data control, etc. And we focused on these key challenges and key pain points. And these are the things that emerged. Legacy systems. Number one, legacy systems. So very, very difficult to move data in and out of legacy systems. So a lot of big, large enterprises are hampered by the past. This hybrid multi-cloud infrastructure. So most businesses operate in at least, I think the average is at least 3 public clouds. Many, many in a lot more than that. And we'll see from some of the case studies that we're about to bring up the complexity of that multi-cloud landscape. Not only the cloud, but also getting data in and out of the cloud from on-prem, from data centers, from devices, etc. It's becoming increasingly complex for them to manage and to control and to operate. We're seeing one of the pain point around data standardization and integration. You have to get data in the right format, and you have to do that sort of pre-analysis on the data in order to integrate the data. Lots of technical limits and bottlenecks, particularly around scale, about being able to operate at scale with data, but also manual processes that still really predominate in a lot of enterprises. Unrealistic expectations, and then data security, data governance, etc. We talked a little bit around. But to summarize, there's an interesting statistic there. 72% of valuable data remains untouched, and it's scattered across this complex landscape of clouds, locations, and it's trapped because of slow, costly, insecure data transfer methods. So at Console Connect, we're addressing that. We, over the past 5-6 years, have developed an on-demand automation platform, an API community, a global network that is fully integrated and automated that helps businesses securely connect and move data between their clouds, between their offices, between devices, between their applications, wherever they want it, and give them control over how that data moves, but more importantly, make it as easy as possible to move that data around. Some of the principles that we've adopted when we built this automated network and platform. Firstly, the freedom to move data around this ecosystem, make it as easy as possible to do that. And we do that through a web-based console or through a series of APIs. Make it very, very easy, point and click, spin up services, turn down services, etc. And we pre-interconnect a lot of these environments together. So all of the clouds, a lot of the big application providers, internet exchanges, thousands of data centers around the world, all underpinned by this private network. So we automate that for enterprises, for customers, and for our partners to make it really easy for them to use. The infrastructure that it operates on, one of our principles is all around having robust, high-performance infrastructure. We operate a vast private network, fiber network, one of the largest IP networks in the world as well, that we've fully automated. And we provide access in and out and manage access in and out of that network over the mobile network and over the internet network and over Ethernet networks to where customers need it to be. We deploy and integrate services, as I said. We're API driven, so everything that you can do on the platform, you can do through an API. And we're AI ready. So we've got the ability to scale, the ability to automate, and we've got the ability to connect these AI environments that exist today. Just in summary around Console Connect. As I mentioned, we operate this sort of vast network, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and a big internet network, IP network that we have fully automated. And we built this platform on top of that makes it very, very easy for you to consume that transport. And then we've we give you the ability to move data around this private network environment and to do that on demand in a very easy, scalable way. And not only that, we've connected this ecosystem on behalf of our customers. So most of the cloud providers all around the world, we have a big estate of on-ramps. A lot of the big software providers are in, I think I said about 1,000 data centers around the world now. We have a marketplace of complementary products, and we connect this community of service providers. We grew up as a carrier, as a service provider over 20 years ago. And so we have, a couple of hundred integrated service providers around the world that we serve and interconnect across this network. I'm not going to go into too much detail around Console and what it does over that. I'm going to let Paul go through some of the use cases and some of the challenges that our customers are facing and illustrate how we're starting to solve those problems. Before I do that, though, just a sort of very quick one. In terms of our AWS on-ramp coverage, you can see there we're in 30 cities, 38 data centers around the world. That's one cloud. We're in, as I mentioned, we're in all of the other clouds as well. We connect all of the other cloud on-ramps, the major public cloud providers and the sort of tier 2 cloud providers as well. We are actually on AWS Marketplace, and we're an AWS Direct Connect partner, so we can work closely with you in supporting you and moving that data around the AWS ecosystem and the external partner ecosystem that we operate in. So that's my bit, talking about the trends, giving you an introduction to Console. I'm now going to hand over to Paul to talk through some of the exciting case studies that we've got.
Thank you, Neil. Good morning, everybody. My name's Paul, and it is almost 10 years ago that I was on this stage as one of the pioneer Direct Connect partners for AWS, hoping that many of you in the room today would be moving mission-critical workloads to the cloud and that you would need to be using something like a Direct Connect product to be able to do that. So it's great to be here almost 10 years later, and the 65,000 attendees, potentially 70,000 attendees at this year's AWS reInvent, is an example of just how successful AWS has been and how true it is that many of you are moving mission-critical workloads to the cloud. I think Rig's introduction about generative AI is the pinnacle use case, where we see large language models existing inside these hyperscale cloud providers and us trying to get our enterprise data in to do the ragging so that we can get effective utilization of those models. But what I'm going to do over the next 20, 30 minutes is talk you through some of the use cases that we see our customers doing and how the partnership between Console Connect and AWS has helped them solve problems that they had, that I suspect many of you have. You've got large data pools on-prem. You're trying to synchronize data between two different clouds. Your CIO is telling you, where's my AI for my company? You don't know how to do it. You don't know how to do it securely within the regulated environment you may be in. I'm going to walk you through some use cases where some of our customers have used the combination of Console Connect and AWS to solve those problems. Multi-cloud data transfer is probably the first use case that we saw emerge. And I'm going to take you through two specific use cases that really illustrate this. The common problem is you're in one cloud and some capability that you need is in another cloud. It could be the large language model in AWS you want to be able to get access to. It could be S3 storage. It could be some other capability where you realize AWS is the best partner that you want, but your primary cloud may be in Azure or in Google. So how do you handle that data transfer when it could be very large data sets? Or, for resiliency reasons, you're trying to maintain data synchronization between two clouds. So, God forbid there's an outage, you've got the ability to be able to restore from your other cloud, but you need to make sure it's a hot backup. So this is a great example. This is a really large of over 900 million customers for an e-commerce wholesale provider in Asia that reached out to Console Connect saying, we've got a very large data set that we'd like to move from one cloud to another. And they said, 5 petabytes of data. And we say, are you sure? You mean 5 terabytes? No, 5 petabytes. I need to move 5 petabytes from one cloud to another cloud. And we've done some rough math on what the egress charges are going to look like, and we think it could be anywhere $50,000 to $100,000 just to move the data from one cloud to another. And we actually have no idea how long it would take, because we're the only option that we're aware of. As Riggs presented at the start, you've got the internet access, you've got VPN access, or you have direct connect. We said, well, actually, we think we can help you with that. Almost 7 years ago, we launched a product called Cloud Router. And what Cloud Router allows you to do is to connect cloud to cloud. And as we walk through a couple of other use cases, you'll learn that you can also connect on-prem and even SIM cards to a Cloud Router. But this is a perfect use case. So what the customer was able to do was to connect this other cloud provider to AWS using a Cloud Router, all within the same metropolitan region, created 5 gigabits of dedicated capacity between the two cloud environments, was able to move that data from one location to the other in under 30 days, guaranteed throughput for the entire time, saving $75,000. Our takeaway, of course, is our pricing model's not right. We should have raised our price. But a great use case if you've got that problem. If you're in one cloud where your primary data is, you know for economic reasons or for other reasons you need to get it to another cloud, this is a great use case, and we think it's a real showcase for the Cloud Router product. The second use case that we had anticipated was going to be more common than we expected is data synchronization. So I'm looking to do some form of processing, and I need to be able to get real-time telemetry into my processing engine. AWS is a fantastic partner for compute. We see a lot of our customers connecting to AWS for their compute, cost-effective, high performance, low latency, but they need to be ensured there's no backlog, no drift in getting the synchronization of their data into AWS to do that processing. Can't tell you the specifics of the use case, but imagine I'm doing video processing and I need near real-time processing of that video data. So what this customer is able to do is create a connection from an on-prem to AWS, again, using our Cloud Router product or using AWS Direct Connect. And they're able to maintain a low latency. As Neil mentioned, it's a substantially large network that we operate. We guarantee no congestion. There's no packet loss on the network that we provide. And so once you've established the latency between on-prem or between the two clouds, it remains stable for the entire time. And you can tune your data ingest pipelines with an assurance that that's going to be a consistent data rate that you're going to get from the network in between the two. Use case that we expected, this instance, it was a manufacturing company that needed to be able to do that video processing on time. And this is a great example of where the combination of Console Connect and AWS Direct Connect was able to solve their problem. It's not just cloud to cloud. Many of you are probably operating in a similar environment as we are, operating in multiple cloud environments, and not just in cloud, but also SaaS applications. How many of you have CRM applications that are now generating data, or ERP systems that are generating data? How do you connect all those different complex data pools to be able to do the types of things that Riggs started off this presentation with? Actually getting access to your data in all the different locations that exist across your network and across your ecosystem so that you can do the type of large language model analysis that you're hoping to achieve as delivering value back to the business. So what we've seen emerge as customers have embraced the Console Connect platform and AWS Direct Connect is that often they're dealing with hybrid cloud environments, and not just two clouds, but in some instances, many. I love this use case. This is one of the ones that you just, every time we have a chance to meet the customer, they're talking about some new thing that they'd love to be able to do and say, hey, can you help us with that? And we're thinking, yeah, probably we can. Probably we can help you with that one. So this is a Southern European power generator servicing over 10 million customers. So huge network that they're operating, very complex IT landscape that they're operating. And what they're asking us is, we've got part of our infrastructure operating in Azure. Our core ERP systems are hosted in Azure. We've got a large data and a mission-critical application in Oracle, and we're moving some workload to AWS. Can you help us with that? We said, absolutely. That's what Cloud Router was designed for. As Neil showed you earlier, we're one of the largest provider of AWS Direct Connect around the world. Our European footprint, as you saw earlier, is deep and strong. We're able to get to all of the locations that they needed to get to for AWS. We're able to get them to Azure in Europe where they needed to get to, and we're one of the largest providers of Oracle Interconnect as well. So, yep, tick, tick, tick. We can get you to all those complex cloud environments. We thought, this is great. Really great use case, long-term partnership. They'd originally been a Direct Connect customer of ours, and then we were able to expand with them as they expanded as well. They moved over 95% of their workload from on-prem into cloud in under 12 months. 95% of on-prem workloads into cloud in under 12 months. And it's a power generator company. I think it's a real good testament to the fact that this is a reliable network and a partnership that allows us to solve for really complex, mission-critical problems are being solved using this partnership between Console Connect and AWS. But the journey didn't end there. This is what really surprised me. Very successful company, continues to acquire other companies. Many of you are probably dealing with mergers and acquisitions. It's that time of the hype cycle in the technology industry. And so what we found is they called us again and said, hey, this company that I've just acquired, actually all of its infrastructure is in Azure. Can we get to their location as well? They're trying to maintain a secure perimeter, as you can imagine, as a power generator, highly regulated industry, lots of constraints that they need to be able to comply with. Yes, so not only was Console Connect of value to solve their complex IT landscape, it also allowed them to do mergers and acquisitions safely and build and extend that wide area network within a single cloud router that connected all of their on-prem, in cloud, and acquired landscape into a single controllable domain. I think it's a great use case and one that we continue to see emerge that we didn't actually anticipate. So we've talked through two examples. One where we're connecting cloud to cloud and you had some mission critical, either large payload or latency that you need to solve for. We've talked through the example where you're dealing with a really complex IT landscape. 10 years ago, it would have existed inside your data center and it was all just a local area network problem. Today, it's all outside your data center and it's a wide area network problem. And our Direct Connect partnership with AWS and our Cloud Router products help solve for that. But there's an emerging form of connectivity, and in the instance of coming back to the generative AI workload, there's an interesting pool of data that's beginning to emerge, and it's IoT. Think of all of those telemetry components that are being generated around your ecosystem. And so we've got a product that we built over the last 3 years that we call Edge SIM that solves for that as well. What excites us about Edge SIM is that, as Neil mentioned, this network began as a service provider, as a traditional carrier. And having a carrier network means that we've got lots of carrier relationships. And our Edge SIM product integrates with over 600 mobile network operators around the world seamlessly. And still, as of today, I think we're the only product in the market that can connect a SIM card to a cloud, completely bypassing the public internet. Now, I'm expecting a lot of you in this room are technologists. And if you're a technologist and you're talking to me about an IoT device, the one thing that scares me is trying to keep that thing secure. Probably didn't put enough RAM in it to be able to do inline upgrades. Probably the OS version or the application version that's running on that IoT device has got some vulnerability in it. There's no way I can upgrade it. It's potentially a liability on my network that I can do nothing about. But it's a critical sensor, and I need to be able to keep it secure. Actually, the ETSI, European Telecommunications Standards Institute in 2023, published a paper saying you cannot put IoT sensors on the internet. It's just not safe. You can't do it. And we believe that's true. We think that's a problem we need to solve. We need to solve for IoT devices getting connectivity to where the workload and the data they produce will be processed, and that's in AWS. It's going to be in cloud. So we were able to combine 600 mobile network operators with our cloud router technology, exactly the same cloud router that I've talked about. Exactly the same cloud router technology can now connect SIM cards. We put them into SIM pools, so you can aggregate 1,000, 10,000, 20,000 SIMs into a logical grouping and connect that edge SIM pool to a cloud router, and any other endpoint that you may have connected, AWS, on-prem, becomes routable and visible to all of those SIM cards that are inside that edge SIM pool. What are some of the use cases that we're seeing emerge? And this is a great one. So this is at scale. So this is in the Philippines. Our partner PacketWorks is connecting 7,000 IoT edge devices to a cloud router and onwards into a hyperscale cloud provider. It's a great use case. And why are they doing it? Because they're managing the towers for a low-RAN network throughout the Philippines. 7,000 devices over 6,000 islands across the Philippines, all using Console Connect, Cloud Router, connecting back to AWS. So great use case of real, secure, as you can imagine, regulated environment where they need to be able to connect edge SIM devices, generating IoT data, and connecting it to a cloud environment. Really, really great partnership. Excited by this one. And finally, another good use case for Edge SIM, what we see here is AWS Direct Connect and Edge SIM. This one here is a manufacturing customer, a little bit like the example I described earlier where we had a manufacturing provider doing video in real time, needing that direct connect. Here's the exact same use case, but in this instance, connecting an IoT device fleet to AWS using Cloud Router technology again. You can't use the public network for this for two reasons. One, latency due to congestion, no control over the quality of service. As Rig mentioned at the start of the presentation, no control over the path from source to destination. And particularly in the European Union, you have pretty strict mandates about your ability to prove the path. The data doesn't move certain jurisdictions. And so what we've been able to provide here is an Edge SIM product connected to a cloud router, connected to AWS, using AWS Direct Connect is a great example of where we can help solve and help you maintain that regulatory umbrella that you need to in those jurisdictions that you're operating in. And the last case that I'll talk through is another example of where you are trying to connect different cloud environments. This one here is a Meraki SD-WAN. So our customer here needed to be able to connect their Meraki SD-WAN into AWS, hosted in AWS, but then connected to an alternative cloud provider. Again, often we're not in charge of the IT landscape that we're asked to operate for their business. Lines of business have picked an application that may be hosted in Azure, or hosted in Alibaba, or hosted in Oracle. And that was an instance that this customer were asking us to help them with. Their line of business had picked an application that was hosted in another cloud provider. They were AWS native, and they needed to be able to connect with their SD-WAN edge to this new application that was introduced by a line of business. So the same building blocks that we've talked about throughout all of these use cases, AWS Direct Connect, Console Connect Direct Connect, Console Connect Cloud Router, and Console Connect Edge SIM have solved all the use cases that we've talked through in this presentation. So in summary, what hopefully you've taken away from our partnership presentation here today is that we've made the management of your wide area network as simple as your local area network was 10 years ago. The user interface that you see here is exactly the user interface you'll experience if you were to log in. We encourage all of you to sign up and create an account. It's a very simple use case and be able to get access to the platform. You don't need to be directly connected to Console Connect to be able to use the platform. The first use case that I began today's presentation with was a cloud-to-cloud use case. And so therefore, in that particular instance, the customer is actually not connected to us at all. We're simply connecting to cloud tenants that they have. So we may be able to help you already and encourage you to sign up today so that you can get a chance to see whether the destinations that you need are on net to us and whether we're able to help you with the use cases that we've just described. And finally, the key takeaway is, in all the examples that we've talked about here, wasn't just controlling latency, jitter, and congestion, it was controlling the security of your perimeter, the ability to be able to build a private area network that you can own and operate and do so from a single interface. And with that, I think we'd like to hand over to Riggs to ask Neil and I a couple of questions. And we'll then see if there's any questions in the audience.
Yeah, so now what we wanted to do was do a quick panel session with Neil and kind of go through like different questions that are probably top of mind to people before opening it up to others. So first question that comes top of mind, we've talked about the different ways that you can connect to AWS, whether it's over the internet, VPN, direct connect. So for both of you, why is internet not a optimal way, or what has changed over the last couple of years where you need that private connectivity in order to like connect to your applications or get data movement into AWS?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll go first, Paul. I think the internet is great.
I don't think so.
Hello, can you hear me? So the internet is great for many things, for moving lots of data. But as we see more and more sensitive, critical data and information reside in the cloud, using the internet to access that data is often not good enough. We heard sort of earlier on in the presentation the issues around security and compliance and being able to control how that data moves. I think with the internet, you've got no control, you've got no SLA, you've got no guarantees. If you operate on a private network, such as one that underpins Console Connect, it's private by design. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think the other thing that we see customers often moving from internet connectivity to direct connect technologies is because they want to get some assurance around cost. So up to 30 to 50% of your egress charges can be saved by using a direct connect technology. And I think that's a really critical conversation we often have with customers about where they want to choose internet or where they want to choose a direct connect partnership.
All right, second question. So first, audience question, how many people know what SDN is? Do have network engineers in the audience. That's good. So back in the early 2010s, there was a big thing in networking called software-defined networking, which really pushed the automation. So can you both talk to a little bit why automation is important with networking and what it does and the value that you guys bring from Console Connect?
Mm-hmm. It's got to be one for the marketing guy.
I think your mic's on now.
It's on? Can you hear me? Okay. Well, you know, as we see that this environment that we're operating is getting hugely complex. We're all accessing more than one cloud, multiple clouds. I think the average is at least 3 public clouds. We're moving data from on-prem. We're moving data from applications, sensitive data. It's becoming much more complex to manage and to control that environment. Every cloud is slightly different in terms of how they operate and how you interconnect with them and how you program that interface. So I think it's the complexity around that requires automation. You know, if for an enterprise to be able to manage that themselves, they need skilled resources, skills people. We know that's short at the moment, a shortage. They need to be able to understand that technology from each of those providers. Instead of focusing on the business that they need to focus on, they're spending a huge amount of time managing that. And I think automation is something that can really take that pain from them and really help really simplify the way things are done.
Yeah, I think in terms of automation if we go back to the 2010s and OpenFlow and Stanford University and that, where the term was first coined, the use cases that they were really trying to solve for were inside the data center, inside the local area network, and OpenFlow was a great example of how you could get vendor neutrality to control local area network using an open standard. And where that became less relevant and why we don't see so much about OpenFlow anymore is because inside the data center is actually not that much relevant. Everything's in AWS. Everything's in a cloud right now. So where do I get network automation if it's outside my wide area network? And so what we've done at Console Connect over the last 5 years is curate those standards bodies that we think are actually going to be able to drive wide area network standardization. And the partner that we found most valuable is MEF, used to be called the Metro Ethernet Forum, now MEF. And they have a life cycle orchestration API called Sonata. And they're quite focused on this east to west carrier payload. And I've recently opened up the MEF API to enterprise. And Console Connect is one of the providers that can allow you to program your wide area network using its open standard API. And we think that's going to be the future of wide area network, including not just virtual cross connects, but also cloud payloads. So you can do an AWS Direct Connect using an open standard API using Console Connect.
Awesome. And OpenFlow brought back a lot of memories for anybody who knows what OpenFlow was when that SDN first came out. You both talked about optimizing the way that data moves into AWS, and whether that's in a co-location, another cloud, or other things. Can you talk about like how do you go about optimizing the data movement and how Direct Connect comes into play with that data movement?
Yeah, I think if you're moving in the two use cases that we saw at the start of the presentation, one was this really large data transfer, so 5 petabytes from one cloud to another. Or in the second use case where we're trying to get a constant flow of video into AWS for processing, you really need to be able to get control over that quality of service. I need my video to be giving a certain percentage of bandwidth to ensure that the kids watching YouTube aren't going to impact the ability to get that telemetry done. And so I think the quality of service aspect of Direct Connect and the fact that I can dedicate a single VLAN for a single application and guarantee the bandwidth, that whether that's coming from on-prem or from one cloud to another, is really key to the value proposition of a Direct Connect partnership.
Awesome. I know I talked a little bit about AI, generative AI. There's a lot of different types of AI with machine learning and saying, is this picture a picture of a cat? Is it a picture of a dog? Is it a picture of a loaf of bread? Anybody seen the movie? No one? No one. Someone's seen the movie. I see the smile on his face. But when you're talking about data movement, like with AI workloads and like using data across multiple clouds, like can you talk about like what people need to think about from a network perspective with that type of data movement, and how do you look at like the optimization and like the challenges that you run into when you are working with like a multi-cloud environment with like AI workloads where it's massive upon massive amounts of data, and whether it's for machine learning or analytics or generative AI?
Yeah, I can give some specific lived examples on that one as well. So I think the use case of 5 petabytes, so we're seeing Direct Connect really critical because that was actually an internal language model that they were moving from one cloud to another because of the cost of processing. So that training component is where we think that there's a real value proposition for these Direct Connect partnerships. The second, that we actually have a lived experience internally. So we have a chat bot. If you log in and talk to Console Connect, we have an internal version of that we're prototyping. But a lot of the data that we use for inference is in one cloud provider because the SaaS application is hosted in one environment, and the primary language model that we use is in another environment. So we actually use Console Connect to be able to connect the two, because what we've encountered is the user experience is really negatively impacted if inference takes too long. If you've got to wait for that inference to occur because it's a human-machine interaction, customers will just drop off. So you've got to be able to have that guaranteed latency between the two, the endpoint where the chatbot is and where the data is, to be able to ensure you've got good quality of service.
And I talked about that a little bit, that like one of the values that Direct Connect brings is actually helping with the latency.
Yeah.
It's not in all cases minimizing everything with latency, but it helps make it so it's not like the staggered, jagged line like you're going across the internet where you can, one path might take you one way that takes so many milliseconds, another path takes another way, but it helps minimize the latency that you have when you're moving data from one location to another. Last question before we open it up to the audience. We did talk a little bit about automation, but can you talk about where APIs come into play and what Console Connect does with APIs and data movement?
Yeah, and so great opportunity to talk a little bit more about the MEF LSO Sonata API. So lots of standards organizations play in this space, GSMA, ETSI, IETF, TM Forum, and others. And what we've encountered is that there's really only one that's focusing on the enterprise trying to program their wide area network. And that's where we think the majority of the use cases. All the use cases we just described today was an enterprise trying to program the wide area network. And so that's why we've leaned in and recently released an open source software module which allows you to map proprietary APIs into a MEF standard. Because what we're one of the first network as a service providers who have integrated with AWS Direct Connect, and obviously we did that more than 10 years ago, before standards even thought about doing this, is they were doing OpenFlow back then. How irrelevant is that? And so we had to be able to introduce these proprietary APIs because that's what our customer base wanted. And now we're seeing the standards institutes slowly catch up. So there's a translation that needs to occur. Often EdgeSIM, for example, we have an API to program EdgeSIM, but it'll probably take another 4 or 5 years before we see the standards bodies show up and have an API designed for that pattern. So this open source software project that if you come by our booth, we're happy to tell you, it's a translator which allows network as a service operators or even enterprises to provide a standards compliant API mapping from proprietary to the open standard approach.
Awesome. So we are out of time. If you do have additional questions, they will kick us out of this room. So please see us outside. But thank you, everybody, for coming. Hope it was a valuable session for you, and enjoy reInvent.
Thank you. Thank you.